What if one decision, made days before kickoff, ended a season, shattered a locker room, and possibly cost a head coach his job? This isn't just about losing a football game. This is about a rookie quarterback outplaying everyone's expectations, a franchise legend breaking the unwritten rules of loyalty, and a coach so stuck in his ways he ignored the fire happening right in front of him. The Cleveland Browns were supposed to dominate the Tennessee Titans, a team with just one win all year, limping into this matchup like they were waiting for the season to end. Instead, the Browns delivered one of the most head-scratching, gut-wrenching, and flat-out unbelievable collapses of the year. And buried under the scoreboard, behind the fumbled snap, the failed conversion, and the defensive meltdown, is a story that's now blowing the doors off the entire Browns organization. From Kevin Stefanski's controversial game plan, to Myles Garrett seemingly calling him out on national television, to rumors of Coach Prime calling ownership himself, this isn't just a bad Sunday. This is the kind of moment that defines legacies. And what you're about to hear, it's not just speculation. It's the unraveling of a team, piece by piece, in real time. Let's break down exactly what happened, why the locker room may be lost for good, and how one rookie quarterback's performance may have accidentally exposed an entire coaching staff. When the Cleveland Browns walked into their home stadium to face the 1-11 Tennessee Titans, this wasn't supposed to be a contest. It was supposed to be a palate cleanser, a break. A get-right game against a team crawling to the finish line of a lost season. Vegas had the Browns listed as 12-point favorites, and honestly, that felt generous to the Titans. The fans expected dominance. The coaches expected a tune-up. But instead, what they got was something that now has the entire franchise scrambling to avoid complete collapse. The final score said 31-29, but that doesn't even begin to tell the story. Because this wasn't just a close loss or a tough break. It was an all-systems failure at every level of the team, made infinitely more tragic by one undeniable truth: they had the game. They had it in their hands. And then, they gave it away. Let this sink in for a moment. You're at home, facing arguably the least threatening team in football, a group that had spent the last 2 months getting steamrolled on both sides of the ball. The same Titans who had scored fewer than 20 points in 6 straight games, who had traded away key players, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere but on a football field. And despite all of that, the Browns managed to hand them their second win of the season on a silver platter. This wasn't some bizarre fluke play. This wasn't a tipped pass or a bad call from a ref. No, the Browns were out-schemed, out-fought, and out-coached from the opening whistle. Tennessee didn't just show up and get lucky. They came in with a plan: run the ball down Cleveland's throat, control the clock, avoid turnovers, and force the Browns to make mistakes. And the Browns, they delivered on that invitation with open arms. It all started with the defense. Cleveland's D-line, which had been a bright spot all season, allowed 184 rushing yards to a team that had essentially been allergic to the run game for weeks. The tackles weren't there. The gaps weren't being plugged. The edge was soft. It's like the unit forgot who they were. You started to notice it in the first quarter: missed assignments, over-pursuits, poor communication, and as the game went on, things snowballed. Every time the Browns tried to seal momentum, the Titans handed it right back to them by marching right down the field. And then there was special teams. A blocked punt, terrible kickoff coverage. The kind of mistakes that good teams don't make and bad teams don't survive. Tennessee routinely started drives near midfield. Cleveland gave them entire chunks of field before they even snapped the ball. You do that in a close game, and you're daring fate to take over. And oh, did it ever. But defense and special teams weren't even the biggest disasters of the day. That title belongs to the coaching staff and what they chose to do, or not do, with a rookie quarterback who was putting on an absolute clinic. Shedeur Sanders, yes, that Shedeur Sanders, son of Coach Prime, was playing the best game of his young career and arguably one of the best by any Browns quarterback all season. 364 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, a 7-yard rushing TD, big throws under pressure, smart decision-making, pocket awareness and mobility that probably caught a few scouts off guard. Time after time, he bilaid out his team and kept them within striking distance. He didn't look just good for a rookie. He looked like someone who belonged. And yet, somehow, he was pulled in the most important play of the game, but we'll get to that part in detail soon. First, you have to understand why this loss hit so hard inside that locker room. It's not just because it hurt the team's playoff standing. or because it was embarrassing to lose to a bottom-tier squad at home. It was because it exposed something deeper, something wrong behind the scenes. There was a disconnect. A lack of adjustment, a lack of urgency, and worst of all, a lack of trust in the players who were getting the job done. The Browns fought back from a 14-point deficit. The young quarterback got hot at the right time. The stadium, after being stunned into silence for most of the second half, came alive with energy as the game tied itself into knots. All the signs of a turning point were there. The players were hoping for a spark. Instead, they got a script. A rigid, predictable, outdated script that ignored everything happening on the field. And that's when the wheels really started to come off. The fans knew it immediately. You could hear the confusion when the offense lined up not with Sanders at the helm, but with a wildcat formation. The play went nowhere, and so did their chances of winning. What should have been a defining win for a rookie quarterback became the breaking point for the entire Browns organization. Because this game, it wasn't just another tally in the loss column. This was a massive spotlight on years of frustration, mismanagement, and questionable leadership decisions that had been simmering under the surface. This time, it boiled over. And the fallout? Well, it's already begun, because this loss didn't just hurt. It exposed everything. When Shedeur Sanders stepped onto that field in Cleveland, most people still saw a project. The rookie quarterback with the high-profile last name. The flashy kid who lit it up at Colorado under his father, Coach Prime, but still had plenty of doubters questioning whether that glitz would translate to the NFL. He wasn't supposed to shine just yet. He wasn't expected to take over a team. Not against grown men, not under the bright lights. And for damn sure not in a pressure cooker like Cleveland, where expectations outweigh logic and patience is in incredibly short supply. But from the very first snap, something felt different. This wasn't a nervous rookie trying to hang on. This was a quarterback making a statement, one throw at a time. Sanders didn't just manage the game, he took it over. 364 passing yards. Let that number marinate. 3 touchdown passes, each more precise than the last. A rushing touchdown, carved out of nothing when the play broke down and instinct took over. It wasn't just the stats, it was how he got them. Calm in the pocket. Quick decisions. Throwing defenders off with eye manipulation like a seasoned vet. The kind of play that makes you forget how new this all is for him. And what made it even more incredible? The situation. This wasn't some low-stakes, mid-season matchup. The Browns were hanging onto their playoff hopes by a thread. The national media was circling. The fan base was restless. Their starting center went down mid-game. Protection was shaky. The Titans were bringing pressure, trying to rattle the rookie early, and they failed. Because nothing rattled Shedeur Sanders that day. He took hits and popped right back up. He scrambled when the pocket collapsed and found ways to extend plays. He read defenses like he was flipping through a script he'd already memorized. And when Cleveland looked dead in the water, down by 14 late in the third quarter, he turned everything around. That 80-yard, 7-play touchdown drive in the fourth, that's when the entire stadium felt the shift. On 3rd and long, he stepped into a collapsing pocket and found his receiver on a back shoulder fade so accurate it looked computer-generated. 2 plays later, he rolled out left off his non-dominant shoulder and delivered a zip pass across his body between 2 defenders and into the window like he'd been doing it his whole life. No panic, no hesitation, just pure execution. This wasn't someone playing above his level for a few lucky drives. This was a quarterback growing up in real time, rising under pressure, and showing the kind of leadership that coaches dream about. But none of that was enough to stop what was coming next. Because here's where the story takes its sharpest, most frustrating turn. Instead of riding the hot hand and trusting the rookie who just brought them within 2 points, head coach Kevin Stefanski pulled him. We'll unpack that decision in full later, but the reason it hit so hard was because it ignored everything Sanders had just done. Think about the message that sends, not just to Shedeur, but to the entire team. You fought back. You clawed your way into contention. You helped ignite the fan base. You put together numbers that rival any rookie performance in recent Browns history. And when the team needed just a single play to tie things up, the reins were yanked from your hands. But maybe the worst part? He never saw it coming. By all accounts, Sanders wasn't told he'd be pulled in that situation. He wasn't injured. He wasn't winded. There wasn't some glaring misread or blown assignment. He was ready. His teammates were ready. You could see it in their body language. They believed in him. And that belief came from what they'd seen on the field that night, a rookie rising to the moment again and again. And yet, that trust wasn't shared upstairs. Stefansky had already made up his mind before the game even started. No matter how Sanders played, no matter how much momentum he built, the plan was set. Run the Wildcat. Don't leave it in your quarterback's hands. It wasn't about feel. It wasn't instinct. It was a decision baked into a play sheet days earlier, a pre-written script pretending to be strategy. And honestly, if Sanders had struggled, if he had shown signs of being overwhelmed, you could maybe understand the caution. But the truth is, he didn't. He showed everything you'd hope for in a future franchise quarterback: arm strength, mental toughness, and maturity. Even after a costly interception earlier in the game, he bounced back with poise. He didn't sulk. He didn't panic. He owned it, regrouped, and led multiple scoring drives to get his team back in the game. That's the part coaches are supposed to love: the response after mistakes, the growth between drives, the signs that you've got someone with it. And now, after one of the most impressive performances by a Browns rookie since anyone can remember, Shedeur Sanders is walking away with a loss not because he didn't perform, but because he wasn't even given the chance to finish what he started. And that's why this game is now being talked about as something bigger than just numbers or standings. This isn't about wins or losses anymore. It's about mistrust, mismanagement, and maybe even mutiny. Because when the rookie looks like the adult in the room and the coach looks like the one panicking under pressure, you've got a storm brewing. And trust me, it's far from over. Let's be clear, the Cleveland Browns didn't lose this game because of talent. They didn't lose because Shedeur Sanders couldn't handle the moment. They didn't lose because the Titans out-executed them. They lost because of one man, Kevin Stefanski. It was a coaching collapse, plain and simple. But not because he made the wrong decision in the heat of battle. Oh no, that would at least be understandable. Coaches make split-second calls that don't always go their way. It happens, that's football. But this wasn't one bad call in the moment. This was a decision planned days in advance, written into the playbook, predestined like some ancient prophecy, no matter what actually happened in the game. Let's walk through it. Shedeur Sanders had just led a sensational scoring drive in the fourth quarter, a drive that covered 80 yards in just 7 plays. Momentum was swinging back toward Cleveland. The crowd, stunned for most of the game, had come back to life. The Browns had a chance to tie things up with a 2-point conversion and flip the narrative. And just when it mattered most, Kevin Stefanski benched his quarterback. No injury, no equipment issue, no logical explanation. Just pulled him off the field. Instead of keeping the ball in the hands of the quarterback who had already thrown for over 350 yards, your hot hand, your spark, the one player keeping you in the game, Stefansky went with the most head-scratching call imaginable: a Wildcat formation. Let's be real. The Wildcat stopped catching defenses off guard years ago. It's a gimmick. And running it in the most crucial moment of the game, while benching the quarterback ripping apart the Titans' secondary, that's not coaching. That's sabotage. It didn't work, of course. It never had a chance. The play was swallowed up at the line, and the Browns walked off the field with stunned silence hanging in the air. But the real twist: turns out it wasn't even a matter of Stefansky panicking in the moment. He told reporters after the game that he'd already decided during the week that the team would run that exact Wildcat play on every 2-point try, no matter what. Let that sink in, before the game, without knowing who'd be hot. Without seeing how Shedeur Sanders might perform. Without adapting to the actual rhythm or momentum of the game, Kevin Stefanski made up his mind days in advance that Sanders wouldn't touch the ball in those moments. It wasn't about coaching strategy, it was about control. It was a coach trying to fit the entire game into his own pre-written narrative, instead of responding to what was unfolding in real time. That's not leadership. That's ego. And the rest of the team knew it, too. According to sources inside the organization, players were shocked on the sideline when Sanders was pulled. Multiple veterans reportedly questioned the call immediately, some even approached coaches mid-game. And after the Wildcat backfired, that frustration turned into quiet fury. Because it wasn't just about one play. It was about trust. If Stefansky wasn't going to trust the guy who had just carried the offense on his back for 4 quarters, who was he going to trust? This was Stefansky failing to adjust. This was Stefansky refusing to adjust. Worse, it was the second time he'd done it that quarter. Just minutes earlier, after the Browns' first fourth-quarter touchdown, Sanders had lined up for another 2-point conversion and fumbled the snap, a small mistake, likely due to a communication issue with a backup center filling in for the injured starter. Nothing catastrophic. No panic from the rookie. Just one of those things that happens in live football. Most coaches let their players shake that off and bounce back. But Stefansky didn't. He decided then and there, backup center or not, momentum or not, that Sanders would not get another 2-point try. And instead of giving him the chance to atone, he benched him entirely when the game hung in the balance. And here's where the frustration turns into disbelief. When reporters asked Stefansky after the game whether the fumbled snap was the reason he didn't go with Sanders again, he said no. He openly admitted the decision had been made before the game even started. He had predetermined that Wildcat would be the call for any 2-point situation. Think about the message that sends. Not just to Sanders, who did absolutely everything right on the field, but to the entire roster. You can play the game of your life, drag your team back from the brink, and still get pulled because the coach decided sometime on Wednesday that it didn't matter how well you played. That's not sticking to a plan. That's denying reality, and the ripple effects were immediate. Players were seen arguing on the sidelines. Coaches were visibly shaken. Myles Garrett, the quiet face of the team, would later give one of the most carefully spoken, but clearly damning, press conference interviews of his career. And inside the building that morning after feeling, it wasn't about shock. It was about inevitability. Because everyone, from the front office to the equipment staff, knew what this game really was. It wasn't just a blow to the standings. It was proof that Stefansky had lost touch with his team, that he was coaching through fear, not feel, that he was more worried about controlling the narrative than letting his best players take control of the game. You can lose games in the NFL. Everyone does. But when it becomes clear you're losing because of stubbornness, ego, and complete disregard for the rhythm of your own locker room, that's how jobs get lost, and fast. And if it wasn't obvious already, the order was coming from above. Because shortly after that final whistle, the Cleveland Browns board called for something you don't hear about very often in the middle of an NFL season: a full-blown, closed-door emergency meeting. There are moments in sports where the scoreboard doesn't tell the story, where the real headline unfolds not on the field, but behind a microphone. And when Myles Garrett stepped up to address the media after the Browns' embarrassing loss to the Titans, most reporters expected generic coach speak. A few cliches about execution, a nod to getting better, and maybe some vague frustration about the outcome. But what they got instead was a masterclass in calculated honesty. Garrett didn't scream. He didn't point fingers. He wasn't emotional. He was focused, measured, quietly devastating. And he said just enough to intentionally blow up the entire narrative. The first reporter asked the expected question, "What did you think of Shedeur Sanders' performance?" Garrett didn't hesitate. He looked right into the cameras and said, I think he did well. I think he looked good. He came up big when we needed him too." On the surface, it sounds like a normal answer. Support your teammate. Keep it cordial. Move on. But anyone who's spent time around this league knows better. Myles Garrett was sending a message. This wasn't just support. It was a subtle and extremely intentional challenge to the coaching staff. Because buried in that quote is the real question. If Shedeur looked so good, if he balled out when you needed him most, why was he standing on the sideline when the game was on the line? It wasn't just what Garrett said, it was what he chose not to say directly. He didn't call Stefansky out by name. He didn't storm out of the room or throw a tantrum. What he did was far smarter and more effective. He gave the truth, wrapped in calm professionalism. And then he kept going. "There's going to be some ups and downs for anyone, especially a rookie," he said. But he went in there and he looked composed, escaped out of some sacks, broke the pocket, made some big-time plays. Again, supportive on the surface. But dig deeper, and what Garrett is doing here is painting a picture. A quarterback who was calm under pressure, who extended plays, who showed poise beyond his years. Every line was carefully chosen to highlight that Sanders earned the right to be trusted. And again, that unspoken question lingers. If Shedeur was doing everything right, then why didn't the coaches reward it? More than anyone on the roster, Myles Garrett has the credibility to say these things and have them land with weight. He's not just a defensive captain. He's not just a pro bowler. He's the face of the franchise. And most importantly, he's not someone who makes public criticisms lightly. Which is why this moment resonates. Because when your quietest superstar starts saying the quiet part out loud, even with carefully chosen words, it means the locker room has reached its breaking point. Insiders reported that Garrett's words didn't just echo in the press room, they shook the entire building. Players took notice. Ownership took notice. The media took notice. Because when your team leader refuses to back the coach's most critical decision, even indirectly, it changes everything. Let's be honest, Garrett could have deflected. He could have said, "We all need to be better," or used the old, "I just focus on the defense" line, but he didn't. In fact, he did the opposite. He doubled down on Sanders. Looking for him to continue to grow, looking for that clock to speed up a little bit, Garrett said. But he looks more and more at ease each week. That line, that's no accident. Maintaining game speed processing is usually the final hurdle for a young QB. A message like this, coming from Garrett, is almost like a public onboarding, a passing of the torch. He's not just praising Sanders here, he's pushing the organization to build around him. Trust him. Stop holding him back. You could feel it in the press room. The tone had shifted. It no longer felt like anyone was talking about a regular loss or a disappointing game. It felt like a bigger story was unfolding in real time, one where the rookie stepped up and the coach stepped down. And what made Garrett's interview even more powerful was how it contrasted with what Kevin Stefanski said just minutes later. Stefansky was robotic, evasive, defensive. Asked to explain the choice to bench Shedeur during the critical two-point try, Stefansky fell back on buzzwords. "It's on me. I make every call. I take full responsibility." But when pressed, when a reporter asked whether the Wildcat play was based on in-game flow or something planned beforehand, he admitted that the decision was made days before, regardless of game flow, regardless of who was playing well. That one line may have sealed his fate. Because when you're the head coach of a franchise whose fans live and die with every snap, and you admit to ignoring the actual performance of your players in favor of a pre-planned script, you lose more than just a game. You lose the locker room. And if Garrett's comments weren't enough, other sources inside the team began leaking frustration fast. Veterans questioned the direction. Young players whispered about mixed messaging, preaching accountability, but pulling the plug on the best performer of the night. Rumors of heated words on the sidelines, none confirmed, but all plausible given the visible disconnect during and after the game. Garrett never had to say Stefansky messed up. He didn't have to. His words, and more importantly, his tone, did it for him. He supported his quarterback, signaled that something was deeply wrong with the game plan, and made it clear, this isn't what a winning organization looks like. Not right now, not with this coaching staff. And when a leader of Garrett's caliber speaks, even softly, ownership listens. Which is why shortly after his press conference wrapped, the emergency meeting upstairs went from possibility to priority. Because the Cleveland Browns didn't just lose to the Titans. They didn't just fall further out of playoff contention. They had their franchise cornerstone publicly declare, in his own way, that the people calling the shots, they're the ones getting in the way. And Garrett, perhaps more than anyone else, made sure that message rang loud and clear. If the game itself cracked the Browns' foundation, Kevin Stefanski's press conference took a sledgehammer to the rest of it. There are ways a coach can lose. You can be out-schemed, outplayed, or simply beaten by fate and bad bounces. But when you walk to that microphone after the worst loss of your season, and you confirm every fear about your leadership in one press conference, that's something else entirely. Players were still peeling tape off their wrists when Stefansky sat down under the glare of the Cleveland media. His face gave away nothing. No emotion, no frustration, just the usual measured calm that, on any other day, might be interpreted as professionalism. On this day, it looked like detachment. The crowd wasn't angry yet, they were stunned. But within minutes, the tone of the entire organization shifted from shell-shocked to fed up. Because instead of explaining his decisions or showing any sign that he recognized how bad things had gone, Stefansky began a loop of empty phrases, over and over. "It's on me. I take responsibility. We've got to coach better." Those are words meant to buy time, but when they come without substance, they're like pouring water on an oil fire. The room could feel it. He wasn't taking responsibility. He was hiding behind the performance of taking responsibility. One reporter, tired of the copy-paste answers, asked what everyone wanted to know. "Coach, who made the decision to pull Shedeur on the two-point play, you or your offensive coordinator?" A simple question. A moment to clarify. Stefanski's jaw tightened. "I make every call. I'm responsible for all of it." Another opportunity passed, and he gave the exact same sentence again and again. It didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like denial rehearsed in advance. The follow-up question hit even harder. "When did you decide to go with the Wildcat instead of keeping your quarterback out there?" And there it was, the fatal moment. "We'd already decided earlier in the week," Stefansky said flatly. "That's our two-point package." A few reporters actually looked around the room to see if anyone else had heard it the same way. Earlier in the week, before the game even happened, before Sanders' breakout, before momentum, before everything. He had locked in a plan that ignored every piece of real-time evidence on Sunday. In a single sentence, he confirmed the worst fears of his team, that their coach wasn't reacting to the game, he was pretending the game didn't matter. Inside the organization, that admission hit harder than the loss itself. Multiple insiders later said this was the precise moment executives started messaging each other about the emergency meeting. Ownership could justify losing. They couldn't justify willful blindness. And the weirdest part, Stefansky didn't seem to realize what he'd just admitted. He kept talking, cycling through platitudes about trusting the process and doing what works in practice. He spoke like the outcome had been some random misfire rather than a glaring reflection of stubborn planning. He kept insisting, "It's on me," but never once said what it actually was. That's the kind of non-answer that erases credibility with professionals who put their bodies on the line each week. These players know when someone is bluffing. Every hollow sentence was fuel for the fire. You could almost hear the locker room watching the press conference on their phones, shaking their heads. Because even if Garrett hadn't said a word earlier, this would have been enough. The players didn't need to argue anymore. Their coach was building their case for them on live television. Then came the part that sealed the room's resentment. A reporter asked whether Shedeur's near-perfect performance had changed how the staff viewed his role moving forward. A softball question, really. All Stefansky had to do was praise the rookie and throw fans a ray of optimism. Instead, he went corporate. Said something like, "We've got a lot of good players. Every week's about matchups." It was textbook coach speak, but everyone heard what it really meant. No reassurance, no acknowledgement that the young quarterback had just carried the team. That silence spoke louder than any criticism could. When leadership can't publicly recognize excellence, players hear only one thing: "You will never be trusted here." By the time the press conference ended, the damage was done. Reporters walked out shaking their heads. Beat writers were already drafting headlines with phrases like tone-deaf, robotic, and out of touch. Television analysts were queuing up panel debates about whether Stefansky had lost the room. He had live on camera. Behind closed doors, calls were flying. Executives to agents, players to family, text threads lighting up with disbelief. No one could believe he'd effectively admitted to coaching by autopilot while the hottest hand on his roster sat on the sideline. And this wasn't just about losing to a one-win team anymore. It was about the realization that something had fundamentally broken within the Browns' hierarchy. The great secret of successful teams is adaptability, the ability to ride momentum, listen to your locker room, make real-time decisions that fit the flow of the game. Stefansky had preached that philosophy for years. Now, in the biggest moment of the season, he'd proven he didn't practice it. That's why ownership moved so quickly. There was no enraged rant, no public spectacle, just a quiet set of phone calls and calendar alerts for an emergency board meeting first thing in the morning. The discussion would no longer be what went wrong. It would be who replaces him. And it all came down to this one press conference, 12 minutes of corporate monotone that convinced everyone watching that the man in charge no longer had any feel for the team he was supposed to lead. When the cameras shut off and the room cleared, Stefansky reportedly sat in silence for several minutes before finally standing and leaving through the side door. No one spoke to him, not one assistant coach. Not even the PR staff. There was nothing left to say. The building was done talking. For the fans, clips of those 12 minutes went viral within the hour. Comments flooded social media, calls for change, jokes about AI-generated coaching, disbelief that the same guy who once won Coach of the Year could sound this empty after such a crucial loss. The narrative was out of his hands now, and everyone knew it. By midnight, there was no more speculation. The emergency meeting wasn't theoretical anymore, it was happening. The Browns were officially in crisis management mode. Because sometimes, the most damaging play doesn't happen on the field. It happens behind a microphone, when the only person with the power to steady the ship accidentally proves to the world that he no longer knows where the wheel even is. Inside the Browns' Berea facility, Monday mornings are usually predictable. Film review, player treatment, a few stiff greetings from coaches who haven't had enough coffee yet. But this Monday was anything but normal. The corridors were quiet, the lights felt too bright, and everyone knew that the doors to the third-floor conference room were shut for a reason. By sunrise, every major outlet was already running the headline: emergency meeting called in Cleveland. The loss itself was bad. The press conference fallout made it catastrophic. Sources close to the team confirmed that owner Jimmy Haslam and the executive board had convened an urgent session to evaluate leadership. That's corporate language for someone's about to lose a job. Inside that room, the mood was tense enough to vibrate. Phones were lined face down on the table. No one wanted to see the notifications. They already knew what they'd say. Sponsors were nervous, season ticket holders were demanding answers, and the national talk shows were running Stefansky sound bites on loop. Haslam started the discussion the way owners do when they're pretending to be calm. He talked about expectations, about maintaining the integrity of the organization. But halfway through the opening statement, he stopped mid-sentence, sighed, and said what everyone was thinking. "We can't keep defending this." That line cracked the dam. One executive brought up the numbers, not the win-loss column, but the optics. Ratings, attendance projections, local sentiment. The Browns had managed to turn one of the most inspiring rookie performances of the year into a public relations disaster. Another board member put it more bluntly. "We've got our future sitting there in Shedeur, and the camera cut to him on the bench while the coach ran a trick play. You can't unsee that." The turning point wasn't statistical. It was emotional. Fans felt betrayed. Players felt unheard. Alumni were calling, wondering what on earth had happened to the new culture that had once been Cleveland's rallying cry. To make matters worse, reports began surfacing that Shedeur Sanders, yes, Coach Prime himself, had reached out directly to Browns ownership. According to multiple insiders, the call wasn't confrontational, but it was clear. Deion supposedly expressed concern about how his son was being handled and stressed that confidence and consistency are everything for a rookie quarterback. Whether every detail of that call is true or not, the very rumor of it exploding on social media made the Browns look disorganized at best, dysfunctional at worst. By mid-morning, the topic was if Stefansky would be let go. It was how quickly. Some pushed for immediate termination. Others recommended letting him finish the season to avoid further chaos. The argument for patience lasted all of 5 minutes before another executive cut in. "Our players have already moved on from him. You could feel it last night. What's the point of waiting?" Around that same time, text messages from players were circulating quietly among team personnel. They weren't mutinous, just exhausted. A couple of veterans reportedly used the same phrase, "We're tired of being the experiment." The board moved systematically through the evidence, the refusal to adjust his game plan even while Sanders flourished. Repeated communication breakdowns with coordinators, locker room reports of dwindling morale, a public backlash after his non-responses to the media. Each bullet point chipped away at any chance of reprieve. For years, Stefansky had been the model of steady leadership, the even-tempered coach who steered the franchise out of chaos. But that calm had curdled into rigidity. His greatest strength had become the very thing tearing him down. Still, firing a coach mid-season isn't just a personnel decision. It's a message to every player, every executive, every fan watching at home. Haslam knew that. So before making anything official, he asked the room one final question. "If we make this move, who leads us tomorrow morning?" Silence. Then names began to surface, interim options ranging from the defensive coordinator to positional assistants with leadership potential. No one inspired excitement, but at least each candidate represented a reset button. Meanwhile, outside that closed door, players were arriving for their meetings, pretending not to check their phones. Reporters were camped in the parking lot, waiting for someone, anyone, to confirm what was happening inside. You could almost hear the tension humming through the building walls. By early afternoon, the meeting had stretched past 3 hours. Staff members walked by the frosted glass and caught flashes of body language, hands gesturing sharply, heads shaking, faces buried in palms. Word spread fast. The decision had been made. The details would be handled by sunset. And yet, amid the chaos, one discussion took an unexpected turn. Haslam reportedly asked a quieter, almost philosophical question. How did we get here again? We keep changing coaches, changing systems, and somehow the culture always ends up eating itself. No one had a real answer. But that line stuck with everyone in the room because it echoed the frustration of an entire city. Cleveland fans have been through countless rebuilds, countless promises of the new era. And somehow, every time, the story comes back to the same headline, potential buried under poor decisions. The leadership meltdown wasn't just about one coach's stubbornness. It was about an organization that couldn't escape its own patterns. Still, something about this particular fiasco felt worse. Maybe because they'd finally found a quarterback who looked different, dynamic, unshaken, magnetic. Maybe because this loss wasn't about talent or effort, but about the absence of common sense. Whatever the reason, the ownership group knew that keeping Stefansky would send the message that mediocrity was acceptable again. And for a fan base that had waited decades for consistency, that was unthinkable. By the time the clocks hit 5 p.m., the decision had leaked. A text from one reporter hit social media first. Sources: Browns expected to part ways with Kevin Stefanski tonight. Phones blew up. Players saw it before they heard it from management. Within minutes, the franchise went from controlled secrecy to open upheaval. Some cheered quietly. Others just exhaled, exhausted. As evening fell over Berea, the boardroom lights finally switched off. The owners stepped out looking less relieved than simply drained. The message was clear: the experiment was over. Back inside, staff members started packing up binders and playbooks. Assistants whispered about interim leadership. One intern described the atmosphere perfectly. It felt like the end of a long argument where everyone knew who was right hours ago. The meltdown wasn't loud. It wasn't cinematic. It was the slow, inevitable snapping of a rubber band pulled too far for too long. Because when a franchise legend like Myles Garrett starts hinting at discontent, when your rookie quarterback outplays the plan you refuse to abandon, and when your press conference turns into evidence for the prosecution, ownership doesn't need to shout. It simply acts. And act they did. By nightfall, Kevin Stefanski's tenure in Cleveland was all but finished. The headlines wrote themselves: Browns clean house after letdown of the year. But buried beneath the breaking news ticker, one question remained, a question that would define what came next. Now that the slate is finally wiped clean, can the Browns overcome the one opponent that's beaten them for years themselves? When the news finally hit the locker room, there wasn't a dramatic outburst. No helmets thrown, no shouting. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it more intense. Dozens of men sat at their stalls knowing what the headlines would say before even checking their phones. Kevin Stefanski was out. The silence didn't come from shock, it came from confirmation. Deep down, everyone had felt this coming since the final minutes of the Titans game. You could trace the moment on film. The offense waiting on the sideline during that doomed two-point attempt, shoulders slumped, eyes staring at the ground. Every player in that huddle had known the decision made no sense. Now the fallout was official, and the air inside that room felt heavy enough to touch. Shedeur Sanders walked in last, hoodie up, earbuds in, mostly stone-faced. Teammates looked at him like they didn't quite know what to say. Was he supposed to feel vindicated? Guilty? Excited? The truth was, he probably felt none of it. Rookie or not, he understood how fast the NFL can turn icons into footnotes. One game you're the story, the next, you're the controversy. A few veterans broke the tension with nervous humor. One lineman muttered, "Guess we'll see who's calling plays next week," and a small ripple of laughter cut through. It lasted about 5 seconds before the mood flopped back into unease. Everyone knew the situation was bigger than jokes. Across the room, Myles Garrett was speaking quietly with a few defensive teammates, explaining that what happens next matters more than what just happened. It wasn't a rally speech, it was pragmatic leadership, the kind that comes from someone who understands how chaos can eat a team alive. "We keep doing our part," he said. "No excuses. Let the upstairs folks figure out their part." Garrett's ability to diffuse the tension was one reason ownership respected him. But even he couldn't ignore the undercurrent running through the room, a cocktail of relief, anger, and uncertainty. Relief because the decision everyone knew was overdue had finally been made. Anger because none of them should have been in this position in the first place. Uncertainty because no one knew what came next. The interim coach, assistant Tom Rees, stepped into the center of the room later that afternoon. "We've got 2 choices," he said, voice steady. "We can drown in this, or we can prove to everyone that this roster isn't the problem." Simple, direct, exactly what the players needed to hear. There was a muted round of claps, not because the words were inspirational, but because they were honest. After months of buzzwords and planned talking points, honesty felt like oxygen. Still, healing a locker room doesn't happen with one speech. The divide between the offense and the coaching staff wasn't just about play calls, it was about faith. Players had stopped believing their voices mattered. You could see that realization land on Rees's face as he looked around the room. He was inheriting not just a team, but a trust deficit. Reporters outside were gathering scraps of information from unnamed players, turning whispers into headlines. Browns veterans felt ignored by previous staff. Locker rooms split over Stefansky's philosophy. Each news story poured salt into wounds that were still wide open. But something interesting began to happen as the noise grew. The team started tuning it out. Maybe it was exhaustion or maybe it was clarity, but there was a shift that week. The players began practicing like they were rebooting, not just recovering. Shedeur Sanders especially. The rookie who had become the accidental lightning rod of the entire saga showed up early, stayed late, and said very little to the media. He wasn't playing the victim. He was sending a message to his teammates. I'm still here. Let's work. His attitude caught on. Within days, the locker room started to feel different, not healed, but active again. The defensive line was joking during drills, receivers were staying after for extra reps, even special teams meetings carried a kind of we're not dead yet energy. The undercurrent of anger found a productive outlet, prove everyone wrong. While the players dug in, ownership and upper management worked quietly to control the public narrative. Statements were drafted, leaked, redrafted. The official press release framed the decision as a mutual parting focused on recalibrating leadership. Fans didn't buy it for a second, but at least it sounded functional. Inside team headquarters, though, conversations were far less polished. Some assistant coaches were packing boxes, unsure whether they'd be retained under the next regime. Others were lobbying for more responsibility. The workplace felt like two parallel worlds, one trying to patch holes for the short term, another already scanning the horizon for a bigger rebuild. For the players, those politics mattered less than the next game plan. Garrett and a few other leaders called an informal meeting midweek, no staff allowed. Every seat in the film room filled. They talked about standards, accountability, and how they didn't want to be the group remembered only for internal drama. Garrett kept it short. How we respond right now decides whether this was the low point or the turning point. That sentence hit harder than any pep talk, because everyone knew exactly what he meant. The Browns have been here before. They've seen seasons implode under the weight of dysfunction. What they hadn't done, at least not recently, was use that implosion to build something stronger. By Thursday, practice looked crisp again. The interim staff trimmed down the playbook, leaned into Sanders' natural rhythm, and encouraged creativity rather than strict scripting. You could see the quarterback relax. He looked free for the first time, reading defenses, taking shots, trusting himself. It felt like the offense had remembered what fun looks like. And maybe that was the strangest part. Amid the chaos of a fired coach, a shaken ownership group, and rumors flying around the league, the locker room finally breathed. Tension had burned everything down, and what remained was raw authenticity. By Friday, whispers from rival teams began circulating that Cleveland suddenly looked dangerous again. They're playing loose, one anonymous scout said. Like they've got nothing left to lose. He wasn't wrong. Because sometimes, a locker room doesn't explode in anger. It decomposes quietly until someone draws a line and says enough. Kevin Stefanski's exit wasn't the spark that burned the building down. It was the vent that finally released the pressure. What will happen next is anyone's guess. Maybe the Browns rally for a late season run. Maybe the rebuild hits reset once more. But whatever comes, nobody in that locker room will ever forget the moment it all tipped. When the silence after a loss turned into the loudest declaration a team could make, we're done waiting for someone else to fix us. We'll do it ourselves. When the dust finally settled over Cleveland's most chaotic week in recent memory, the city felt strangely calm, like the air right after a storm, thick with humidity but quiet enough that you can hear your own heartbeat. Fans weren't celebrating, they were simply processing. They had seen this movie before, but this version felt different. This time, the scapegoat wasn't a locker room feud or a quarterback controversy. It was a fundamental failure of vision. And as the headlines scrolled, Browns part ways with Kevin Stefanski, there was relief not because someone had been fired, but because accountability had actually arrived. Inside the facility, the aftermath felt like the first day after finals week, half the staff cleaning up paperwork, half pretending not to look over their shoulders. The interim leadership group, fronted by Tom Rees, was working around the clock to stabilize things while the front office quietly began compiling shortlists for a permanent replacement. Names floated through hallways like weather forecasts, coordinators from playoff teams, college innovators, even a couple of surprise veterans who'd been out of coaching for years. But for players, speculation meant very little. Their focus was survival. The season wasn't over, it had simply been rebooted. Every practice rep felt like an audition: play well, show professionalism, and maybe you're part of whatever comes next. That unspoken truth gave the sessions a raw urgency. They were no longer just running drills, they were fighting for identity. Among them, Shedeur Sanders' emergence became the heartbeat of that identity. The rookie didn't ask for spotlight, he inherited it by default. Yet his performance through the chaos became a symbol of resilience. Coaches who'd barely spoken to him a month earlier were now building the game plan around his strengths: tempo, confidence, improvisation. When he rolled out on his first practice drive under the interim staff, hitting 3 straight completions on crossing routes, the sideline broke into applause usually reserved for touchdowns. It wasn't about those throws, it was about the statement, "We're moving forward." Reporters, desperate for storylines beyond coaching drama, began profiling Sanders as the bright thread running through an unraveling blanket. Every article contrasted his calm, measured demeanor with the confusion surrounding him. Even national analysts who had doubted his NFL readiness admitted that his leadership through turbulence looked like something special. Meanwhile, ownership worked behind the scenes to reboot public trust. Haslam's communications team released a carefully worded message to fans acknowledging the frustration without making excuses. The letter promised a transparent coaching search and a renewed commitment to aligning leadership with player potential. Translation: we finally learned not to smother our stars with scripts. Outside of football operations, the city itself joined the conversation. Talk shows debated whether this collapse might finally push the Browns into modernity, embracing adaptability, analytics with empathy rather than bureaucracy. Former players called into local radio stations sharing cautious optimism, the sports radio version of a group therapy session. Of course, not everyone was forgiving. Stefansky still had loyalists, players who respected his discipline, analysts who pointed to injuries and off-field chaos. But even most defenders admitted that his downfall wasn't about one bad season, it was about inertia. In an industry built on momentum, he'd stopped moving. Inside the locker room, the sense of togetherness grew stronger the moment hierarchy stopped suffocating creativity. Receivers started designing tweaks to routes during film sessions. The defensive line held self-scouting meetings without waiting for permission. Garrett's natural authority anchored the group, but what elevated the atmosphere was mutual accountability, not command. During one players-only gathering, veteran guard Joel Bitonio said something that would later echo through every sports blog headline. "We spent more time proving we were right than trying to win together. That ends now." It was that kind of statement, simple, heartfelt, that began redefining the Browns' narrative. Practices became more animated. Sanders took more pre-snap control, adjusting protections and reading defensive shifts with growing confidence. The offense started playing looser, more fluid, almost joyful. Reporters who attended open sessions noted that the rookie, who had once seemed reserved to avoid stepping on toes, was now orchestrating the huddle like a veteran. The public saw it too. When he trotted out for his first start post-Stefansky, the crowd didn't give polite applause. They roared, partly for the kid, partly for themselves. It wasn't just hope, it was defiance. Fans were saying, if the team can reinvent itself, so can we. The Browns went on to win that game in messy, imperfect fashion, defense bending but not breaking, offense riding bursts of improvisation that looked nothing like the tidy playbooks of months past. There were still penalties, drops, breakdowns, but there was also life. And for Cleveland, that was enough. After the win, Sanders' press conference lasted only 6 minutes. When asked what felt different under the new regime, he smiled just slightly. "We're trusting each other," he said. "When something works, we lean in. When it doesn't, we adjust. That's football." Those 2 sentences summarized everything Cleveland had been trying to learn for years. Still, the fallout wasn't neatly contained. National pundits debated whether Stefansky's firing was impulsive or inevitable. Rumors about the next head coach dominated broadcasts. Some insiders hinted at growing influence from Deion Sanders and other external advisors. The Browns remained under a microscope, every move dissected for signs of repeat pattern. Yet inside team headquarters, people were too busy to care. Staffers who'd spent months fearing the axe now felt free to innovate. One assistant joked, "We've got fewer meetings and more coaching, that's progress." Even ownership seemed re-energized. Haslam held short conversations with players individually, an unusual gesture that didn't fix everything but proved attentiveness. For once, top-down leadership didn't feel sealed off behind glass. By season's end, the Browns hadn't turned into instant contenders. The record remained uneven, but the tone was different, realistic optimism instead of annual delusion. The offense clicked more weeks than not. The defense rediscovered its edge. Most importantly, the locker room stayed intact. And somewhere in that shift lay the real victory, unity built not on slogans but on shared bruises. Because what Cleveland learned through this debacle was simple, if painfully earned. You can't script growth. You can't coach by autopilot. You can't manufacture trust out of press conference buzzwords. You have to earn it in the quiet after losses, in the rebuilding of locker room faith, in the determination to keep learning even when the city doubts you. The Browns still have miles to go before the word stable fits naturally next to their name. But now there's something new at the core. A young quarterback who believes, veterans who rally around him, and an ownership group humbled enough to get out of its own way. As winter settled over Lake Erie, one columnist summed it up perfectly. For once, Cleveland's biggest win wasn't on the scoreboard. It was realizing that the only way to change history is to stop repeating it. And so, the story shifts, no longer about collapse, but about the slow, determined climb that comes after.